Hi, ocean lovers. Welcome to episode number 9 of Dive Stories, brought to you by PADI, helping millions around the world to seek adventure and save the ocean. I'm your host, Ocean Allison, and on today's episode, I'm chatting with Philippe and Ashlan Cousteau. Philippe and Ashlan are an ocean exploration and activism power couple. During this episode, they share all about their motivations to expand the Cousteau legacy, some seriously incredible diving adventures, and their thoughts on the present and future of ocean conservation. All that and more coming right up. Thanks for being here. You're listening to Dive Stories. We bring the underwater world to you through in-depth conversations with inspiring divers from around the globe. Thanks for diving in with us as we seek adventure and save the ocean. Happy listening and happy diving. Today's Dive Stories guests are ocean exploration and activism power couple, Philippe and Ashlan Cousteau. Philippe and Ashlan, welcome to Dive Stories, and thank you both so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Allison, thank you for having us.
We're delighted.
Wonderful. Well, we're actually going to start out by diving right into what we call the Dive 5. And how the Dive 5 works is at the start of each episode, I ask our guests 5 rapid fire questions about their experiences as divers and ocean lovers. And since there's 2 of you, Philippe, maybe we'll just have you answer first, and then Ashlan, you can answer right after. So what do you guys think? Are you ready to answer the Dive 5?
Yeah, Dive 5, go.
Let's see who has better answers.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, number 1, where is the first place you ever took a breath underwater?
Nice, France.
Okay, and Ashlan?
Tampa, Florida.
Okay, number 2, in one word, just one word, how does diving make you feel?
Don't take my word.
Uh-oh. Free.
Darn it! I was going to say free, but I would say weightless.
Okay, number 3, what is your favorite ocean animal?
Octopus.
Grouper.
Okay, number 4, where is your dream dive destination that you haven't gotten to explore yet?
Antarctica.
Seychelles.
Okay, and then the last one, number 5, in just one word, what does the ocean mean to you?
Adventure.
Power.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you both so much for answering the Dive 5. We're going to get a little more in-depth now by jumping into the core of the interview. And I want to start out by chatting with you about this activity that we call scuba diving. Now, in case our listeners may not be aware, Philippe, your grandfather, the legendary Jacques Cousteau, among the many incredible things he did in his lifetime, he co-invented the aqualung, which was certainly the launching point of modern scuba diving. So for you personally, Philippe, what does it mean to see so many, millions and millions of people all around the world participating in this activity that your grandfather pioneered?
It's always gives me great pride and to think that our family had such an important role in opening the world's eyes to the wonders of the ocean. And I'm particularly reminded of the fact that it was just 77 years ago when my grandfather first stepped foot into the Marne River outside of Paris to test the early iterations of the scaphandre autonome, or the aqualung. And, my grandfather partnered with an engineer named Yves Gagnon. They co-invented that device. And it was something that was a response to my grandfather's desire to spend more time underwater. Originally, he had wanted to be a pilot in the French aviation program. But after a car accident, he broke his back. Or during a car accident, he broke his back and afterwards was washed out of the program and was told to swim in the Mediterranean every day. And so he did that to rehabilitate himself, rebuild his strength, and started freediving and was frustrated that he couldn't spend more time underwater. And through fortune and happenstance, he met an engineer named Gagnon. The rest is history. They created the aqualung. So I have great pride in that, but it's also an important story for me that I think about often, because it's a story that reminds us that sometimes the path that we think we're going to go on, the path that we think is the one that is right for us, sometimes through no fault of our own, ends up not being the path that we follow. My grandfather, it was a terrible tragedy that he couldn't join the aviation program. Yet he turned that tragedy, he turned that new path into a triumph. And it's a lesson, I think, in resilience, in problem solving, in creativity, and in optimism that is particularly maybe poignant in the circumstance that we all find ourselves in. That my grandfather certainly made lemonade out of lemons.
And another thing I think is so interesting too is the actual device, the actual aqualung device, the regulator and the valve that takes the air under pressure and delivers it to you at ambient pressure hasn't really changed.
No.
It's almost exactly the same.
Yeah, the basics are the same, right?
So the fact that we are all 77 years later, more or less, using that same device is incredible. It just goes to show how, A, what a good invention it was, and B, it's timeless. And, we are global ambassadors for Aqualung. So it's amazing every time we get in the water that we're still connected to Philippe and to that legacy.
Yeah, and it's really inspired just this incredible community and culture and ability to explore the underwater world, like you said. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. Now, Ashlan, you've had a super successful career in entertainment broadcasting. You've worked for more than a decade as a correspondent on all kinds of networks like Access Hollywood, MTV, E. And I know you two have been married for, I think, like 7 years now, but what has it been like for you, during that time, Ashlan, not only taking the Cousteau name, but sort of blending these two worlds of pop culture and ocean conservation?
When I first met Philippe, he was just come back from covering the BP oil spill. And I had just finished, a long week at E talking about the latest shenanigans of the Kardashians. And I remember thinking to myself, I think there's probably more to life than what I was currently talking about at work. And it was to be a entertainment journalist was my dream job, and I loved it. But I kind of got to a point in my life where I kind of, like Jacques, I was looking for more. I was looking for some purpose. And when Philippe and I first started dating, and, he was telling me these amazing stories of all the places he had been and what he had seen and his work, championing for our natural world, I just thought, how can we make this cooler, I should say? How can we make it interesting? How can we get reality television shows about this? This guy seems like Indiana Jones, but he's for good. So that's kind of just when I set out to, when we set out to start working together and just trying to make conservation and trying to make saving our oceans fun and full of adventure. So that's really, I feel very fortunate that I've been able to kind of merge my skill sets and really make a difference. And then, now that you're correct, we've been married for 7 years. We have a little 20-month-old baby, and we just want to do these things together. And that's what's so exciting. So we're just always looking of, how can we be together as a family and make saving the world fun?
Yeah. Wow. It's really amazing that you two have been able to blend, like you said, your unique passions and skills to become this, like I mentioned in the intro, this kind of ocean exploration and activism power couple, and now a power family, I guess I should say.
Your baby fish to work. That's
it's interesting because, and this is a part of my family story that I don't think a lot of people know or remember, perhaps. My grandmother Simone was pivotal to my grandfather's work. Mm-hmm. It was, though, at a time that women oftentimes took a back seat. And nevertheless, she spent more time on Calypso than my grandfather did. The crew called her La Bergère, which means the shepherdess in French. And she was so important to all of those decades of work. My mother spent 13 years on expedition with my father, Philippe Sr., and was critical to his work and his perspective. And after my father died, she's really the one that kept his work and that legacy alive for us. We only saw my grandfather, my sister and I, a few times a year. And so throughout the way, which I think has always been the case, there have been these powerful, smart women that have been in the past behind the scenes in many respects. And so it's not to me, not a surprise now that Ashlan is such a powerful force for me. And now we're in a different era. Now she's in front of the camera and a partner with me in a way that, it wasn't the case in past generations. So it's kind of a continuation in a way of our duo, so to speak, of how important partnerships have been between my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, and my father over the last several decades. Now it's just a little bit more front and center. And so that's really been a lot of fun to be able to work together and to learn from her and to loosen up a little bit of my own stodgy ways and my earnestness in telling story, learning from her perspective and experience all those years and how to tell stories that appeal to a broad audience.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. So great to hear. I'm curious, though, in talking about your adventures, you've obviously had a lot of adventures below the surface. I'm curious, how and when did each of your initial diving journeys begin? Philippe, do you want to share first on that?
Sure. My diving started even before I can remember. Family friends, former crew members of the Cousteau team who would, when I'd visit them in the south of France, they would, let me breathe through a regulator, even when I was little. And then at the time when I did dive a few times before technically 13, because that was the age. I know it's younger now, but that was the age when I was younger that you had to wait till you could get certified. So I had been diving, through my, 10, 11, 12, et cetera, with friends of the family. But I got certified in Long Island Sound at 13 as soon as I was able to. But yes, formally Long Island Sound, I remember there was a hurricane offshore. And so the visibility was, I don't know, like a foot. It was way offshore, but still it kicked up lots of silt. And Long Island Sound was all gnarly. And I always tell people that was my biggest mistake with Ashlan.
Well, because so I'd always wanted to learn how to dive, and my parents are amazing about, like, we always traveled somewhere really cool growing up, but they are not outdoorsy people. So I always wanted to dive. I grew up in North Carolina. The beaches in North Carolina are some of the most gorgeous in the world. I always wanted to do it, but I never got a chance. And when I met Philippe, I was like, this might be my chance to learn how to scuba dive. So our first proper trip we took as a couple, we had been dating maybe like 3 months. He took me to Bonaire and got me scuba certified. And yes, it is, I will say that's possibly one of the worst decisions my husband ever made, because it was so beautiful. I was getting certified in a 2-piece swimsuit. It was so great. And then I think a couple trips later, we went up to up off Seattle to go diving with orcas. And in
Tri-Suit, or Seven Mills.
In Seven Mills. And that was a
very cold,
vastly different experience.
Ashlan had a little panic attack, and I thought to myself, I should have gotten her certified. And this is my advice to everybody: get certified somewhere that's kind of gnarly if you can first.
Yeah.
And then it's all
or just maybe
downhill
not tropical
from there.
Paradise.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I want to kind of, shift gears here a little bit. Philippe, over the years, you've written several books, focused on the ocean and conservation, obviously, and they're mostly for children and teens, including books like Follow the Moon Home, Make a Splash, Going Blue, and most recently, The Endangereds. And they're all super cool resources for kids. But I want to touch on a project that both of you actually just teamed up to write, a book called Oceans for Dummies, which is part of the well-known For Dummies book series. Listeners, probably many of you have seen or heard of that For Dummies book series. I know it's launching soon, around the time that this podcast episode's actually going to be published. So lay it out for us. What inspired you to make this book a reality, and what sort of topics did you include?
Well, I have to hand this over to Ashlan because honestly, this is predominantly her baby. I had a role, and I think I wrote 3 out of 24 chapters.
Yes.
And handled all the photos and
Yes.
the permissions and reaching out to scientific institutions, et cetera, that I have relationships with, like Woods Hole and, Mo Marine, et cetera. But Ashlan did the lion's share of the work. I have to give credit where credit is due. So I'll let her explain the genesis of that project.
Thank you, sweetheart. And I will say it kind of started off a little selfishly. Allison, as you asked earlier, when I was quote unquote becoming a Cousteau, I loved science when I was growing up. I was in AP biology in high school, but I studied journalism. So I always felt that my knowledge of the ocean was lacking. And, when Philippe and I would start to go out and giving speeches, I always felt a little nervous because I felt like I was not necessarily an imposter, but I just never felt like I could really hold my own when it came to the ocean. And also I realized when going to a lot of those ocean conferences, it was usually the same people saying the same thing to the same group of people. And, I realized, I think we both realized that, we really need to diversify the people that are hearing about our ocean and hearing about our ocean's problems and our ocean solutions. So Oceans for Dummies was really just a way to have a book in the marketplace that really isn't out there, because there's either books for kids or there's marine biology books for university students. There's not really anything out there that just kind of lays out the ocean, because it is big, it is complex, it is hard to understand, and it has so many facets. So that's, during quarantine, I literally sat in the corner of our bedroom and wrote almost 400 pages. And with Philippe, and we had an amazing co-writer too that helped us get it all into Dummies format. But it's a book for everyone. It's a book that middle school kids can enjoy. It's a book that retired people can enjoy. It's a book that takes you from how our ocean was formed to how tides work, to how does the ocean control our weather, and how does that relate to climate? How does Antarctica relate to us in the middle of the United States? How,
all the different animal
seafood,
species,
the
conservation, the
blue
blue
economy,
governance, like the law of the sea. So, it is like soup to nuts.
Yeah.
Everything about the ocean. And with Ashlan's wonderful way of writing, it's fun and it's easy to get. And I think it's, I believe it's going to be one of the central pieces to any ocean library, because no one's an expert in everything. We're all a dummy about something. And, but any questions you have that one has about the ocean, we'll be able to pick up this book and be like, oh, ocean acidification in a couple pages. Got it. It's not a chapter about ocean acidification, which we don't need for the average individual. It's something that's light and easy to understand and be like, oh, okay, I'm curious how this works, how that works. And what that is. And we have curated a collection of extraordinary photographs from friends from all over the world, like Paul Nicklin and Christina Mittermeier, who were so kind to let us use their photos, and Anna Maria Chediak and Keith Ellenbogen and all these folks that we know who are really amazing photographers. So we have coffee table quality photos in the book as well, which has been a lot of fun to be able to do. And Woods Hole, so many groups came and let us use their photos.
That's awesome. So in addition to sharing your knowledge and your love for the ocean by writing books, like the children's books I mentioned, Philippe, that you've written, and then now Oceans for Dummies, you two also work, sometimes separately, but also oftentimes together as hosts and presenters on a variety of TV programs where you explore the world above and below the surface in all kinds of different ways. And I want to touch on a few of them here. We can't really get to all of them, but how about this? I'll say a name of a TV show that one of you or both of you has hosted, and then you can give myself and listeners a brief rundown of what that particular show is all about. Does that sound good?
Great.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so first up is Awesome Planet.
So Awesome Planet is a show that I host and executive produce. It's a syndicated show, still on the air. We're in 6th season. We're just wrapping 6th season now. Multi-Emmy nominated. It typically airs mostly on local Fox channels around the country, but sometimes other networks. It's also on Hulu, on Amazon Prime. And it's a show that's all about exploring the world and how the world works, everything from volcanoes to sharks to ice, glaciers. We've been all over the world, and it's been an amazing, successful show that is targeted towards, I would like to say, 6 to 60. It's fun for everybody to watch. And but being a Saturday morning show, our main viewers are between 6 and probably 15 years old. But it's a great show.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, the next one is Caribbean Pirate Treasure.
That is a show that we did. We had 3 seasons of together on Travel Channel. And Philippe and I went around the Caribbean exploring pirate lore, looking for sunken ships and treasure. And what was so great about that is every episode was a new location with a new story. And Philippe's background, he actually studied history at university. So he loved the historic part. And, we got to dive in all these amazing places and, find deck spikes underwater that had been part of a pirate ship that sunk after it caught on fire.
Cannons, anchors, musket balls. I mean,
we were able on that series to literally touch the past.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting. And we were also able to talk about hurricane damage and winds and currents and climate change and plastic pollution. So it was a super fun show.
Yeah.
And we stopped that show when I got pregnant.
Okay, and the last one I want to touch on is Nuclear Sharks.
Best adventure ever.
Yeah, I think that's one of our favorites ever. Nuclear Sharks was a show for Shark Week 2016, I think?
16 or 17.
16 or 17. We were the highest rated show that year, and we went out to the Marshall Islands because we'd heard rumors that there were sharks particularly around the Bikini Atoll, which is an area that in the 1950s and 60s, the United States used as a nuclear testing ground. 23
nuclear bombs they dropped on this little section of atolls. So everything was killed for miles around. But 60 years later, when we went back, because the area is more or less a de facto marine protected area, because the island is still radioactive, it was the most beautiful diving we had done, the most in the middle of the ocean we had ever been.
Yeah, this is a very remote place out in Bikini Atoll.
But it was just so great. And
surrounded by schools of 50, 60, 70 sharks at a time that had never seen people before, so we're very curious. It was the sharks, as some people always ask, none of the sharks were radioactive. Nothing was glowing.
Nobody had double heads.
Because the ocean disperses and dilutes that radioactivity pretty quickly, whereas it sticks around on land.
Yeah.
The ocean.
We didn't stay on the island only for a few hours. That was it.
We were not on land very long, but it
was really such that I think that was one of our best adventures.
And a great reminder and lesson of the resilience of nature. Yeah. And I think that's one of the messages that we shared it as part of Nuclear Sharks, and we talk about that experience often because, again, the worst fire and brimstone humanity can engineer, we threw at those islands, and 67 years later, because they were left alone, nature, at least in the ocean, had bounced back enormously. And it's a hopeful message for humanity as we look at issues like 30 by 30 and the campaigns that are launching now to try and protect particular areas in the ocean and on land to build resilience in the face of climate change, that it works and that nature can be a powerful ally if we give it a chance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ocean lovers, it's time for the dive log, the part of the show where we feature an epic dive story from one of our amazing listeners. This episode's listener dive story comes from PADI master scuba diver trainer Tom Simmons about an unforgettable dive that he had in the Florida Keys. Let's dive in.
It was a typical dive on Molasses Reef in Key Largo, Florida. I was guiding a single guest as opposed to a group, and he was beckoning me to a spot where he hovered in the water column pointing toward the coral reef. I wasn't sure what treasure he had found, but I certainly didn't expect to see a Caribbean reef octopus, which is exactly what he was pointing at. Octopus sightings are more than rare in the Florida Keys. For one thing, they're nocturnal. For another, they camouflage extremely well on the rocky reefs, where there are many little holes for them to hide inside. In more than 1,500 dives in the Keys, this is my first and only octopus. But this little guy seemed totally unstressed by our presence. I got within a few inches and shot a nice picture of him with my diver in the background. Next, I withdrew a couple of feet and took some video as the octopus traveled a short distance and landed again. No ink, no dramatic color changes, no drama. What a great day.
Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing that incredible underwater experience with us. I would say that a once-in-a-lifetime encounter with an octopus definitely makes for an unforgettable dive. Listeners, if you have an epic dive story to share too, head to PADI.com/podcast to record and submit one of your most memorable dive stories for a chance to be featured in an upcoming episode. We love hearing from our global community of PADI divers, so head to PADI.com/podcast today. And now, back to this episode. Philippe, in 2005, you co-founded your nonprofit Earth Echo International with your sister, Ashlan Cousteau, in honor of your father and your grandfather. And it's such an amazing organization. But before we get into, the programs and the resources that Earth Echo provides, I would really love if you could share a bit about the wonderful quote from your father that inspires the vision of Earth Echo.
Well, there's a few, but certainly my father and grandfather shared with me that they have a simple vision. It's one that I share and all of us at Earth Echo share, that every single child born on Earth has the fundamental right to clean air and to fresh water, to walk on healthy Earth under a blue sky. And my grandfather would often tell me growing up that before we can talk about conservation, we have to talk about education. And he recognized, particularly towards the end of his life, that education was something that the environmental community and movement had underinvested in to its own detriment. And that if we were going to create the kind of social and cultural foundation to support conservation, then that had to start with education. And yet, if you look at most of the big nonprofit organizations, ocean conservation groups out there, and I've been on the board and served with many of them, and we continue to collaborate with many of them, education has been something that has been widely neglected. You look at the foundations, the funders, still to this day, many of them don't fund education. And I think that's part of the problem that we live in a society, as Ashlan said earlier, that lacks some basics around ocean literacy, about environmental literacy, and thus make choices economically and politically that are not consistent with sustainability. And so we started Earth Echo because we looked around and realized we don't need another conservation group. There are plenty of those. We don't need to reinvent that wheel. But what we need more of is education. And the proof is in the pudding. We've been at this 15 years and along with several other organizations, but a major shift has happened over the last 15 to 20 years. When I was in high school, we didn't have green clubs and groups and environmental committees. Now you can't walk into a high school anywhere in the country and not find those, where the kids aren't just doing beach cleanups, but they're helping to pass laws. They're doing community-based projects to help protect wetlands or important habitats. It's really astonishing to see what young people are doing, and I'm proud to say that is how we build durability in conservation, and that's how we're going to protect the ocean, is by building that audience and growing the constituency of people. We can't keep preaching to the converted. We've been doing that for decades. We need to grow the constituency of people that care about this, and that's how we're going to change the world.
And Earth Echo really has such an important mission of empowering youth to take action for a sustainable future. I love that take action part. You're not only educating them, but you're enabling them to, be inspired to take their own action. And Ashlan, I know you're also super involved with and passionate about Earth Echo as well. So, for parents or any young people that are listening right now, what are some of the main programs and resources that Earth Echo provides, and how can kids get involved?
Well, it's we have a lot of different programs. Everything is at earthecho.org. We are really all about how do we provide resources to teachers and educators. So we have a program called the Earth Echo Academy where we actually have available to any teachers listening a series of that can be eligible to apply for grants to support continuing education around ocean education and the environment. And we do workshops, professional development training online for teachers. We also have a lot of resources for young people. We have our Youth Leadership Council and our Ocean Echo 30 by 30. We're big proponents and involved in a couple different projects, but Ocean Echo 30 by 30 is building a youth movement to support 30 by 30, which of course is to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030, which the eminent biologist E.O. Wilson said, we need to protect 30% of nature to stop the precipitous decline in biodiversity. We've lost half the world's biodiversity in 40 years. And in order to stop that continued decline, we need to set critical areas in the ocean aside and on land. And so we're part of that campaign. We're building the youth strategy and the youth movement for that in partnership with, you name it, all the big groups out there. And we've taken it upon ourselves to work with other youth organizations to really build that youth movement globally. We have young people from India and Africa and Latin America, of course, North America, Australia, you name it, everywhere working with us on that. So we have that. And then we have our water challenge, our global water challenge, which is the world's largest citizen science water quality testing program. Over 2 million people in over 140 countries have participated in that program over the years. And so that and, other smattering of things, but those are some of the main things that we have.
And I think one thing that Earth Echo continually pushes, and I think is so important, is the youth have so much power. To all the youth listening, don't feel like you have to wait until you're 18.
Yeah.
To be an adult, to be able to vote, to make change. You can make change today. And I think it's just showing them that and helping them use it is really what Earth Echo is all about.
Now, I want to shift gears a little bit again. I know we've touched on this a little bit, that you've both obviously had a lot of exciting underwater adventures, but with the name of this podcast being Dive Stories, I asked this to all of our guests. What is one of your most memorable dive stories? Ashlan, do you want to share first?
We went on a dive in the aquarium, which is right off of Lighthouse Atoll.
Lighthouse Reef.
Lighthouse Reef, near the Blue Hole in Belize. And we were down there filming for Travel Channel, and we had a day off. So, of course, on our day off, what do? We go dive. And they weren't kidding when they called this area the aquarium. It was absolutely beautiful. I mean, there were eagle rays everywhere. There were just fish. There were sharks that were, hanging out with us. And I noticed it out of the corner of my eye.
It's an MPA.
Oh, yeah. It is a marine protected area. Thank you, Philippe. It is a marine protected area.
This is why it's so abundant.
Hence the reason why it's so fabulous. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this grouper. And I was like, ooh, he's kind of big. This grouper came up right to my face and was looking at me right in the eye. And then he and Philippe is watching this from
I'm watching
distance,
this, yeah.
and he's like, what is happening?
I came around the corner of the coral, and I'm looking at this scene unfold in front, and I stopped, and I'm like, in awe.
So we just started kind of swimming, but he kept looking back at me, and I was like, I think this grouper wants me to follow him.
Yeah.
So I started following him, and he was just taking me all around the coral, this big coral head that was his house. And then I stopped and looked at something, and he literally came back to me and started looking at what I was looking at. And then he started swimming away again, so I followed him, and he ended up taking me inside this big coral bommy to, I guess, where he slept.
It's like a cave kind of thing underneath.
Yeah, he took me into his house.
It honestly was just amazing.
Wow. Okay, and so Philippe, what's one of your most memorable dive stories?
I'll say one of my most memorable, and I've had so many, but we were diving in. I was filming a series called Oceans for the BBC about 10 years ago, and we were diving all over the world for the show. And I was in the Sea of Cortez, and there are enormous schools of Humboldt squid that will come up to the surface at night from the deep waters, and they're about 5 or 6 feet long. And they have a reddish color to them, but they can pulse this bright red color up and down their body. And thousands of them rise from the deep water each night. Because of course the largest migration on Earth occurs every night in the ocean, right? When deep ocean animals come up to the surface, to feed. And so we were filming them, and so essentially what you had to do was, and this current was ripping, and so the cameraman and I, you had to attach yourself to a cord that was tied to the boat, or you'd be swept away, jump in the water, and descend to about 100 feet, and float there. And it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, it's all quiet, and all of a sudden you look down and you see this red glow beneath you slowly come into view and get stronger and stronger and stronger, and all of a sudden thousands of these massive 5-6 foot, I mean as big as I am, squid. And these Humboldt squid, they don't have suckers on their tentacles, they have hooks like little teeth in place of all the suckers, and all of a sudden they're swarming you, they're all over you.
Because they were trying to figure out who you are, too. Yeah, they're very curious,
right? They reach out and they're like touching you, and there are these hooks like hooking onto your and these massive beaks as big as my fist, and then it would dart off, and the eyeballs are enormous. And there's just hundreds of them swirling all around you, and they're going really, really fast. They're pulsing this red color. The cameraman's filming me, and I could tell the look on his face is like, what the hell is going on? It was terrifying and exciting, but mostly terrifying because they're also cannibalistic. So like, sometimes, for whatever reason, a few of them will, like, right in front of me, I watched this, they attacked one and, like, tore it to pieces. I mean, they're, like, they mean business. And so that was definitely one I can still, like, close my eyes and see it now. My heart was racing. It was pretty freaky.
Yeah, pretty vivid. It sounds like still in your mind, even though it was a while ago.
Cannibalistic, flashing Humboldt squid
6 foot long
versus
Humboldt
my
squid,
sweet grouper who took me on a tour.
Definitely both memorable in their own ways. So to wrap up, I want to ask you both about your thoughts on the present and the future of ocean conservation. And Philippe, you've said previously that the legacy left behind by your grandfather and your father is fundamentally one of problem solving and innovation and adaptation. And, they found and created solutions in order to explore and document and share the magic of the underwater world with the world. And I personally think that in many ways, ocean conservation is an opportunity for problem solving, right? So with that, what are some of the pathways and initiatives from the individual level and all the way on up that you both see as being really impactful and really important when it comes to safeguarding healthy oceans now and also into the future?
What gives us hope? Because there's a lot of bad news out there, especially when it comes to our ocean and ocean plastics and overfishing and climate change and ocean acidification and warming ocean temperatures. I mean, my God. But what gives us hope is we know what works. One of the best tools that we have are implementing marine protected areas. Like we saw in the Marshalls, like we've seen in Cabo Pulmo, like we've seen in parts of the Mediterranean, and even in places like Antarctica. We know marine protected areas work, and it's really just setting aside specific biodiversity hotspots and just letting them be. That's really all we have to do. So, on the road for 30 by 30 that we're supporting along with a whole slew of other NGOs. One of the first steps that we're really excited about that we think we can really get across the finish line is in Antarctica. There are 3 new marine protected areas on the table. And if we get these marine protected areas approved, it will be the largest single act of conservation in the history of humankind. And even though it's so far away, Antarctica is so important because it's the nutrient-rich waters of Antarctica that get pushed all around the world. So saving Antarctica, saving those waters, keeping them fertile is really saving ourselves. And so that's a big push. It's called Antarctica 2020. Philippe and I are on that board, and
it's a coalition of global leaders, heads of state, etc., that we're all working together to make this happen.
To get those 3 MPAs.
We're trying to do that this year, yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say for me, it's you pointed out, as the legacies evolved, I think about my grandfather's generation. And it was a generation of exploration. It was really about seeing what's down there for the first time. It wasn't really until my father and his influence on my grandfather in the 1960s, as is so often the case with young people challenging the adults, that it really became about conservation. Because my father went back to a couple of places he'd grown up diving in the 40s and 50s when they just started out. And he had seen such a terrible decline in the health of those ecosystems. Mm-hmm. It was my father who went to my grandfather and was like, it's not just about exploration, this is about conservation. My father went on to film, produce, and direct 26 of the episodes of the Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, and was really pivotal to pushing my grandfather and all of their work towards really conservation focus. I think about our generation as a generation not of exploration, not just of conservation, but of participation. And what I look at and what I get excited about is we have a whole new generation. We have a whole new movement of people who are active and engaged and who want to be part of the solution. Gone are the old days where we expected there to be the conservation, white knight to come to our rescue, the hero that would fix it all for us, and all of us could kind of just keep doing what we were doing. There's a new generation that recognizes that we all really need to be vocal. We all need to be engaged in our communities. We all need to be engaged politically and economically and making choices with our wallets. And that's what really gives me excitement about the future, is this idea of participation. And then I think that, coupled with what Ashlan was saying, is that there are some basic tools out there that we know work. We have a lot of hope ahead of us, and a lot of potential to restore the ocean to abundance and to, offer a better world, at least to our grandchildren, than we've given to our children.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of our global community of PADI divers and ocean lovers, thank you both for sharing your passion for exploring and protecting the underwater world with the world, for inspiring youth to take action for a sustainable future. And thank you for joining us on Dive Stories. It's been really great chatting with you two.
Thank you for having us. It's been wonderful.
We're fans. We appreciate the opportunity. We're honored to be a part of it. And hopefully we'll see everybody out in the water soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Dive Stories. You've just heard Philippe and Ashlan Cousteau, ocean exploration and activism power couple. To learn more about their work, you can follow them on social media at @PCousteau and at Ashlan Cousteau, and visit earthecho.org. Looking for ideas of how to turn your passion into purpose? PADI is on a mission to unite people from around the globe to take action for the ocean, above and below the surface. Like divers holding a torch, this growing community of PADI torchbearers lights the path towards a better balance between humanity and the ocean. You can sign up right now to join this global community at padi.com/conservation. Together, our collective light shines brighter. This has been Dive Stories, brought to you by PADI, Seek Adventure, Save the Ocean. If you love the ocean and enjoyed this podcast episode, please subscribe to Dive Stories in your podcast app and feel free to leave a review. Follow PADI on social media and head to padi.com to join our community of torchbearers working together to seek adventure and save the ocean. I'm your host, Ocean Allison. Happy diving!